I'm Hudson Carter, a 46-year-old man with a steady job, a dream lake house in Dallas, Texas, and a 2-decade marriage. The house was eerily quiet that night. I sat quietly on the old armchair in the living room, the dim light from the table lamp beside me not enough to dispel the darkness that surrounded me. In my hand was a glass of whiskey, something I usually reserve for special occasions. But today I needed it to calm the feeling of unease creeping into my heart. The phone on the table vibrated, the light of the screen catching my attention. It was a text message from an unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored messages like this, but for some reason, I reached for the phone. 4 simple words appeared on the screen: Penelope, Grayson, Brightmoor, 306 inches. I blinked a few times, trying to comprehend what I had just read. Along with the message was a photo. Penelope, my wife, standing next to a man in the lobby of the Brightmoor Hotel. Her eyes were on him, a smile she had reserved for me. My chest tightened, my breath caught in my throat. Number this had to be a mistake, or someone was playing a prank. But my heart, with an inexplicable pain, knew it was true. I picked up my phone, about to call Penelope, but then stopped. She had told me she had a late meeting at the office tonight. "We need to discuss a big campaign," she'd said with a sweet smile. As she'd walked out of the house a few hours ago, I remembered the tight black dress she'd worn, which had made her look more stunning than ever. And now, that image was flashing on my phone screen again. Except she was standing next to Grayson, the colleague she'd mentioned. I couldn't sit still. Everything inside me screamed that I needed to figure this out. Now. Without thinking, I grabbed my car keys and dashed out of the house. The cool night air hit me in the face as I got in, but the numbness wasn't enough to calm the anger and confusion that was boiling inside me. As I drove to the Brightmoor, my mind was racing with questions. What is she doing there? Who sent this message? Am I being played? But every time the image on the phone screen appeared in my mind, a part of me died. I had lived with Penelope for 20 years, shared everything from the happiest moments to the most difficult ones. We had been the closest of friends, people who knew each other's thoughts without words. And now I had to doubt her. When I got to the hotel, it was quiet outside. I sat in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to control my breathing. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to explode. But I had to stay calm. I couldn't let my anger get... I walked into the hotel lobby, my shoes making soft noises on the polished tile floor. The receptionist looked at me curiously, but I didn't care. I headed straight for the elevator and pressed the number for the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor hallway was long and quiet. I walked slowly, one step at a time, and then stopped in front of room 306. I heard a soft laugh. Penelope's voice I couldn't mistake. Everything in front of me blurred. I wanted to rush in, but my feet were nailed to the spot. I stood there listening to the pieces of my life falling apart behind that door. I stood there, in front of the door to room 306, as if my entire world had stopped. The laughter inside, Penelope's voice, so sweet but now tinged with betrayal, left me breathless. I couldn't turn away, couldn't pretend this wasn't happening, but I couldn't open that door either. I was afraid that if I went in, I'd never be able to go back to my life. As I struggled with myself, the door to the room suddenly opened. Penelope stepped out, her blonde hair falling loosely over her shoulders, her black dress neat, but unable to hide the haste in her movements. Grayson followed, a smirk on his face as if he knew exactly what he was doing. I stood still at the end of the hallway, just far enough away that they wouldn't notice me, but close enough to see everything. Penelope didn't look around. She was busy checking her phone, probably for a text or call from me. Grayson leaned in, said something that made her laugh. The sound echoed down the hallway, stabbing me in the chest. There was no doubt about it. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a cruel joke. This was the truth. They walked away, turned the corner, and disappeared into the elevator. I stood there for a moment, frozen in place. My mind was racing with emotions. Anger, hurt, humiliation. How could she do this to me? How could she betray 20 years of marriage, memories, and our wedding vows? What had I done to deserve this? I turned and walked quickly to the other elevator to avoid them. I couldn't let them see me like this, weak and broken. As the elevator took me to the ground floor, My mind was still trying to process everything that had just happened. But one thing I knew for sure, I couldn't let this continue. Back in the car, I sat in the dark, my phone still glowing with a photo from the anonymous text. I watched the image over and over again, every detail seared into my mind. Outside the glass, the neon lights of the Brightmoor Hotel reflected faintly. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare from which I could not wake. I couldn't just sit here. I needed to know the truth. I picked up my phone and called Penelope. It rang for a long time before she answered, her tone as calm as if nothing had happened. Hudson, you're calling late. What's up? She asked, her voice gentle but now a mask. Where are you? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. I know, she replied immediately. I had just finished a meeting at the office. I'm about to go home. Her words made my stomach clench. How could she lie so smoothly? I wanted to scream at her, but instead I replied, Okay, I'll wait for you to come back. I hung up and threw the phone on the seat next to me. My breathing was heavy, as if I had just run a long distance. I knew I couldn't talk to her right away, not when I was so angry. I needed time to collect my thoughts and prepare for the inevitable confrontation. When I got home, I sat in the dark living room, waiting for Penelope. The door opened and she walked in, still in her black dress. She smiled when she saw me, but her eyes quickly turned worried when she realized I didn't respond. Aren't you going to bed yet? She asked, putting her bag down and walking towards me. I was thinking, I replied, my voice low, my eyes fixed on her. About what? She smiled slightly, but I could see she was starting to feel uncomfortable. About everything, I replied, my voice challenging her. About us. About what's really happening. She paused, her eyes meeting mine for a split second. Then she laughed, a soft but defensive sound. What are you talking about? I don't understand. Penelope, I said, my voice cold now. I went to the Brightmoor Hotel tonight. The color drained from her face. She stood there, saying nothing, but I could see the panic in her eyes. I stood up, taking a step toward her. I saw you and Grayson, I continued, each word like a knife. So, what now? What do you want to tell me? Penelope swallowed, trying to find the words, but nothing came out. I felt like a volcano was boiling inside me, but I held back. I wanted to hear her, wanted her to admit the truth, even though I knew it would break my heart. Hudson, you have to understand, she began, but I held up my hand, stopping her. No, Penelope, don't try to explain. Just tell me the truth. Why? Why him? I asked, my voice both hurt and angry. She was silent, her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel pity. For the first time in 20 years, I looked at the woman before me, not with love, but with deep disappointment and hurt. After that night, everything changed for me. Penelope went on with her life as if nothing had happened, but I couldn't pretend. Every time I looked at her, I saw her walking out of room 306 with Grayson. It haunted me, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I couldn't bear to live with doubt, but I couldn't rush into confrontation without preparation. I needed the truth, the whole truth. I began to pay more attention to Penelope's behavior. Things that I had previously overlooked became clearer. She often came home late, using the excuse of being busy at the office. On those occasions, she would smile gently, kissing me gently on the cheek, as if to reassure me. But now those kisses felt empty, lifeless, just a shell hiding something deep inside. Penelope also started spending more. I noticed unusual charges coming into our joint account, bills from fancy restaurants, hotels I'd never heard of, and expensive gift shops. When I asked, she just laughed and said they were gifts for business partners, part of her job. That might have been enough to convince the old Hudson, who trusted her and never checked up on her, but not the current Hudson. One evening, when Penelope said she needed to go out to meet a colleague, I decided to follow her. I tried to keep my distance so she wouldn't notice. She drove to a small but cozy restaurant in downtown Dallas. I parked in a secluded spot and waited, the minutes feeling like hours. When she walked into the restaurant, not alone, but with Grayson, I knew I was right. They had chosen a table in the darkest part of the restaurant, where they thought no one would see. But I could see clearly from where I was, and I saw everything. The way he put his hand on hers, the way she smiled at him, a smile I thought was reserved for me. When I got home that night, I felt consumed by anger, but I couldn't explode, couldn't face Penelope without more evidence. I needed the whole truth. I needed a plan. The next morning, I went to the office of a private investigator I'd heard about from a colleague. Alex Thompson, a middle-aged man with white hair and piercing eyes, gave me the impression that he had seen every lie under the sun. When I told him my story, he was unfazed. "You are not the first, Hudson. And sadly, you will not be the last," he said, his voice deadpan. I gave Alex everything he needed: Penelope's schedule, details about Grayson, and any suspicious spending. He listened carefully, took meticulous notes, and assured me that he would find out the truth. 3 days after I met Alex, I received a call from him. His flat voice on the phone made me nervous and excited at the same time. "Hudson, I found some information you need to review," he said. I drove straight to his office without delay, feeling like my heart was about to jump out of my chest. Alex's office was in an old building in downtown Dallas, with faded wood walls and fluorescent lighting that made it look like the set of a detective movie. Alex waited for me in a small room, a thick file on the desk. He gestured for me to sit down, then opened the file and slid it toward me. "Everything I found is here," he said. "I advise you to prepare yourself." I flipped through the documents, the photos, the receipts. Penelope had been seeing Grayson at different hotels at least twice a week for almost a year. They'd dined at fancy restaurants, gone shopping together, and even taken a weekend trip to Austin without my knowledge. I stared at one photo where Grayson had his hand on Penelope's waist as they entered a hotel. Her face was radiant, filled with happiness, a look I didn't see when she was with me. Alex continued, "She spent about $15,000 from your joint account on these encounters, including gifts and hotel expenses. But there is one more thing you need to know." I looked up, my eyes filled with confusion. "What?" Alex sat up straight, his voice serious. "Grayson didn't just cheat on you. He cheated on his wife. I've been following him for a while, and he has a family outside of Houston, a wife and 3 kids. He's a master at keeping secrets." I felt like I had been punched in the face. Not only had Penelope betrayed me, but she had also been deceived by the man she thought was the perfect lover. It all seemed like a giant farce, where everyone was wearing false masks. "Does his wife know?" I asked. "Not yet," Alex replied. "But if you want, I can send her everything I find." I sat silently, trying to sort through my thoughts. Each photo, each piece of evidence was like a knife stabbing into my self-esteem. But instead of breaking down, I felt a surge of anger, a force that pushed me into action. "I want her to know," I said firmly. "Not only his wife, but Penelope too." A few days later, Alex sent all the evidence of Grayson and Penelope's relationship to his wife in an anonymous envelope. I didn't expect anything to happen right away, but I knew the truth would spread and cause a stir. With Penelope, I decided to keep quiet for a while longer. I wanted to see if she would confess, but she didn't. She continued to live a double life, still coming home to me as if nothing had happened, still laughing, still hugging and kissing me in front of our daughter, Savannah, as if everything was perfect. One night, Penelope came home later than usual. I waited for her in the living room, just like before, but this time, things were different. When she came in, I didn't ask where she had been. I just looked at her, keeping a face so calm that she stopped. "What's wrong, Hudson?" she asked, trying to smile. "You look stressed. Is there anything you want to tell me?" I asked, my voice calm but sharp. Penelope paused. Her eyes flashed with uncertainty, but she quickly hid it, replacing it with a look of surprise. "What do you mean? What did you say?" I smiled faintly, a humorless smile. "About Grayson. About the times I met him at the hotel, the romantic dinners, the gifts I bought with our money." Her face turned pale at once. She tried to say something, but no words came out. I continued, "I know everything, Penelope. And not only I know, his wife knows too. I made sure of it." "Hudson, you don't understand," she began, her voice shaking. "It's not what you think, not what I thought." I laughed, a loud, bitter laugh this time. "So, what do you want me to think, Penelope? That you're just trying something new? That you need some space to explore yourself? She didn't answer. Tears started to flow down her face, but I didn't feel the pain anymore. Now I only felt emptiness, a cold void in my heart. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was heavy. I sat at the kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee in my hand, staring into space. Penelope walked in, her eyes puffy from crying all night. She said nothing, just pulled up a chair and sat across from me. The silence between us was like an invisible barrier, a wall that I didn't know if I could break down. "Hudson," she said finally, her voice soft and hoarse. "Can we talk?" I put down my coffee, my eyes never leaving hers. "What else is there to say, Penelope? I think it's obvious." She took a deep breath, her hands clasped together, as if trying to keep herself from breaking. "I'm sorry," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was wrong. I don't know where to begin, but I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you." I smiled faintly, a bitter smile. "Don't want to hurt me? You think lying to me for a year is your way of showing that?" She bowed her head, saying nothing. Only a small sob echoed in the quiet space. I looked at her, and even though my heart was broken beyond repair, I still felt a part of me ache. This was the woman I'd loved for 20 years, the woman I thought would never betray me. "Hudson." She looked up, her eyes filled with despair. "I got caught up in this. I can't explain it. It's not because I don't love you. I still love you more than anything." "Don't say you love me, Penelope," I interrupted, my voice hardening. "Love isn't like that. Love isn't lies. It isn't betrayal. You've destroyed everything we had." She wiped away her tears, trying to regain her composure. "Hudson, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I want you to understand that Grayson doesn't matter. He was just an escape. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was because I felt like I wasn't myself anymore. I felt empty, like I was living a life that I didn't really belong to." I stayed silent, listening to her, but her words only made me more angry. "So that's why? Because you feel empty? And you think having an affair will fill that void?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice trailing off. "I did wrong, and I can't make excuses. But, Hudson, I want to make it right. I want us to go back to how we were." I closed my eyes, trying to contain the anger boiling inside me. "There's no turning back, Penelope. You have chosen your path, and now you must take responsibility for it. So, what are you going to do?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Divorce? Leave me after everything we've been through?" "I haven't decided yet," I replied, my voice cold. "But I'm sure of one thing. I won't let you or Grayson continue to ruin my life." That evening, our daughter Savannah decided to come over for dinner. I hadn't told her anything about what was going on between Penelope and me. Savannah had always thought our family was perfect, and though I was angry, I didn't want to shatter her world, at least not yet. When Savannah walked in, she looked radiant. "Hi, Mom and Dad," she exclaimed, her smile as bright as ever. "I brought you your favorite apple pie." Penelope smiled, but it was so forced I could see the cracks in her mask. "Thanks, Savannah. Let me get the plates." Dinner was a heavy affair that Savannah didn't seem to notice. I tried to keep calm, talking to her about school, about her wedding plans with William, her fiancé, but every time Penelope spoke, everything inside me boiled over. After dinner, Savannah left the table to clean up, and I decided it was time to get things straight. I took a deep breath, gripping the arms of my chair before saying, "Savannah, would you sit down for a moment? I have something to tell you." Savannah stopped, looking at me curiously. "What is it, Dad?" She sat down, her eyes shifting from me to Penelope, who was quietly biting her lip, looking uneasy. "I want you to know that our family isn't as perfect as you think it is," I said, my voice even but strained. "Your mother and we're going through something serious." "What problem?" Savannah asked, surprise and concern evident on her face. I looked her straight in the eye. "Your mother had an affair," Savannah gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" She turned to Penelope, her eyes questioning. Penelope clenched her hands, tears starting to fall. "Savannah, I don't want you to know this, but your father is right. I made a mistake." Mom, you're kidding, right? Savannah said, her voice shaking. You can't do this. This is our family. How could you betray Dad like this? Penelope tried to stay calm, but tears were streaming down her face. Savannah, I know I was wrong, but I love my family. I love you and your father. I just I just lost my way. Lost? Savannah screamed. You weren't lost. You chose it. You chose to hurt Dad and destroy our family. I felt a little gloating at Savannah's reaction, but at the same time, my heart broke, knowing that my daughter was suffering needlessly. Savannah, I don't want you to get caught up in this, I said, but you need to know the truth. And the truth is that your mother lied to this family for over a year. What about Grayson? Savannah asked, her voice like a knife. Is it him? Penelope looked up, her eyes panicked. You know him? Savannah laughed, a cold, bitter laugh. Of course I did. You've mentioned him many times, but I never thought that you and him. You're horrible. Penelope burst into tears, trying to explain. Savannah, I didn't want this to happen. I got caught up in it. He made me feel wanted, loved. Love? Savannah interrupted, her voice filled with indignation. You have everything. A family that loves you, a husband who is always there for you, and you're still not satisfied? I sat there, silently watching the scene before me, feeling both pain and cold. I didn't want Savannah to be the one to suffer this, but now I knew that my daughter understood the truth. Penelope stood up, trying to approach Savannah, but she backed away. I don't want to hear any more, Savannah said, her voice cold. I need time to think about all this. The daughter left the house, leaving Penelope and I in silence. Penelope turned to look at me, her eyes filled with despair. Hudson, I lost my daughter. Please don't let me lose you too. I stood up, feeling anger rising, but I held it in. You made a choice, Penelope, and now you have to face the consequences. This isn't just about me. This is about Savannah, about the family you broke. Hudson, please, she sobbed, but I had nothing more to say. I walked out of the room, leaving her in her own silence and pain. After that tumultuous night, I knew I couldn't go on living the same way. Penelope had broken the trust I had placed in her, and the family I'd tried to protect was now in pieces. But instead of wallowing in grief, I decided to take action. If Penelope and Grayson thought they could fool me without consequences, they would soon find out they were wrong. I started with the finances first. Penelope thought I didn't pay attention to my spending, but she forgot. I'm a financial expert. I spent the next morning going through all of our joint bank accounts, credit cards, and real estate. I found many unusual expenses that Penelope had used to pay for her visits with Grayson: hotel bills, lavish dinners, and expensive gifts. The total came to nearly $20,000, our family money. I immediately contacted my attorney, Richard Avery, a longtime friend and family law expert. We discussed the situation and the steps I would take to protect my assets in the event of a divorce. Richard was not surprised to hear my story. Hudson, this is not the first time I have been in a situation like this, he said, but I will make sure you do not suffer further losses. Richard advised me to transfer the majority of my personal assets, including stocks and savings accounts, to a trust in my name alone. He also suggested that I seek to gather further evidence of Penelope and Grayson's relationship to increase my legal advantage. I agreed, deciding to proceed in a discreet manner. Next, I turned back to Alex, the private investigator I'd hired earlier. This time, I wanted him to focus exclusively on Grayson. I wanted to know everything about him: his job, his family, his finances, and any weaknesses he might be hiding. I need to know everything, Alex, I said, my voice colder than ever. If he has anything to lose, I want to make sure he loses it all. Alex nodded, his expression serious. I'll get to work right away. Trust me, Hudson. He won't have anywhere to hide. Over the course of a few days, Alex provided me with a wealth of information about Grayson. He was not only an adulterer, but also an opportunist. He had borrowed tens of thousands of dollars from acquaintances and had no intention of paying them back. He also had extensive credit card debt and was being monitored by his current employer for shady spending. Furthermore, his wife, a wealthy woman from a prominent Houston family, seemed completely unaware of her husband's affairs. So he's walking a tightrope, and any slip will send him falling, I said, smiling bitterly as I looked over Alex's report. Yes, Alex replied. If you want, I can send all this information to his wife. That would definitely ruin everything. No rush, I said, my eyes full of determination. I want him to suffer little by little, the way I suffered. With all the information Alex had gathered, I began to plot how to turn the tables. Every move was carefully calculated, leaving no room for error. This wasn't just about revenge. This was my way of taking back control of my life. I started by sending the information Alex had provided about Grayson to the HR department at his company, an anonymous letter with detailed evidence of his shady spending and unprofessional behavior. I didn't know how they would handle it, but I knew that Grayson would inevitably get in trouble when his actions were exposed. A few days later, Alex called with the news. Grayson was suspended. The news gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. I could imagine his face when he received the notice from his boss. His arrogance was definitely gone now. But this was just the beginning. Alex was ready to send an anonymous envelope to Grayson's wife, containing all the evidence of his relationship with Penelope. But before he did, I decided to intervene myself. I wanted to make sure the message came across clearly. I wrote a letter to accompany it, explaining that I didn't want to hurt her, but that she had a right to know the truth about her husband. A week after the envelope was mailed, Alex broke the news. Grayson's wife had filed for divorce. Not only that, she had hired a lawyer to demand financial compensation from him. Grayson, once a self-satisfied man with everything under his belt, was now a failure. He had lost his job, his family, and was about to lose the little money he had left. I didn't rush into a confrontation with Penelope. Instead, I let things unfold slowly, like a small but painful wound that lingered. I let her realize that Grayson wasn't the perfect solution she thought he was. She began to feel stressed and anxious, because Grayson was no longer in touch with her. Her texts went unanswered. Her calls went unanswered. I knew she was slowly realizing that she had bet everything on a man who wasn't worth it. When I saw her completely broken down, I chose the right time to talk. One evening, I invited her to sit down in the living room. The space was so quiet that I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. "Penelope," I began, my voice calm but authoritative. "We need to talk one last time before this is all over." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears, her face filled with despair. "Hudson, I know I did wrong, but please don't do this. Don't leave me." I shook my head, bitterness rising in my heart. "This isn't about me abandoning you, Penelope. This is about the truth. And the truth is that you chose to betray me, to betray this family." She burst into tears, trying to grab my hand, but I pulled away. "Where is Grayson?" I asked, my voice cold. "Didn't he come to save you?" The question stunned her. She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He doesn't matter anymore, Hudson. I realize I was wrong to trust him. I just want to make things right with you." I looked at her, full of pity, but no love. "It's too late, Penelope. It's too late." The conversation ended when I handed her the divorce papers my lawyer had prepared. "You'll get your share, but don't expect anything else," I said. "You no longer have control over my life." Penelope took the file, her face lifeless. I knew that she understood that this was the end, not only of our marriage, but of all the illusions she had held on to. I felt a part of me relieved to see her collapse, but at the same time, a little empty inside. A week after I served Penelope the divorce papers, she reacted exactly as I expected. Penelope refused to sign. Instead, she went to a lawyer who offered her a pretty sweet deal, keeping the lake house, a large portion of my assets, and a monthly allowance from me. Not surprising. Penelope had always been one to refuse to give up easily. But this time, I was ready. A few days later, I received an official notice from her lawyer requesting mediation. I read every word of that letter with a faint smile. Obviously, she thought she could make me give in. She didn't know that I'd prepared it in advance. I contacted my attorney, Richard Avery, and we went over the details. Richard was not only a good attorney, but also a loyal friend who understood my situation. "Hudson, she can try to claim everything," Richard said as he looked over the paperwork. "But with the evidence of adultery and how she used the family money, we have a big advantage." Richard proposed a clear strategy. focus on proving that Penelope had seriously violated her marriage vows and caused financial harm. We would use all the evidence Alex had collected, from hotel receipts to expensive gifts she bought Grayson. Alex's photos, text messages, and even reports would become sharp weapons in our hands. When the mediation began, I walked into the conference room with complete confidence. Penelope was there with her lawyer, a sleek-looking man in an expensive suit. She looked at me with a mixture of anger and concern. Perhaps she thought I would beg for forgiveness or even give in to avoid trouble, but I had no intention of doing any of those things. "Hudson," Penelope's attorney began, his voice smooth as oil, "we can resolve this amicably. Penelope is asking for a fair share of the estate and spousal support. This is a fair offer." I smiled, a cold smile. "Fair? You call it fair that she used my money to fund an affair?" I glanced at Penelope, who was avoiding my gaze. "I have no intention of paying for her mistake," I said, my tone firm. "And I certainly won't let her take anything I don't approve of." Richard began to present our evidence, document by document, photo by photo, brought to the table. Penelope paled when she saw the hotel bills, the gifts she had bought for Grayson with money from the joint account. The text messages between her and Grayson, filled with sweet but betrayal words, were read aloud to the room. I could see the panic in her eyes as the truth was revealed bit by bit. "As you can see," Richard said, turning his eyes to Penelope's attorney, "Miss Penelope has not only violated her marriage vows, but has also misused family finances to support her illicit relationship. We will not stand down." Her lawyer looked confused, trying to keep his composure. "But that doesn't erase the fact that this property was accumulated during the marriage. Ms. Penelope still has a legal right to seek a division." Richard chuckled, but he couldn't hide his sarcasm. "Yes, but let the court decide. And with this evidence, I'm sure the outcome won't be what she expected." The mediation ended without a settlement. Penelope, despite her weakness, still clung to the faint hope that the law would be on her side. But I knew that this battle, no matter how long it lasted, would only have one outcome: her complete demise. The trial was held in a small Dallas courtroom. Outside, the sky was gray, a sign of a troubled day. I walked into the courtroom with Richard by my side, feeling ready for battle. Penelope sat at the other table with her attorney. She looked thinner, her eyes sunken, as if the stress had sapped her vitality. The trial opened with Richard presenting our case. He began by providing irrefutable evidence of Penelope's affair and how she used the family's collective money to finance her secret encounters. Photographs, text messages, and hotel receipts were presented to the court, each piece of evidence cutting into the image Penelope had tried so hard to maintain. Penelope's lawyer tried to counter, arguing that her adultery was not enough reason to deprive her of her legal rights in the marriage. He insisted that the marital assets should still be divided equally, regardless of her wrongdoing. Richard was undeterred. "The assets can be divided," he said, his voice calm but forceful. "But the financial abuse and serious breach of trust cannot be ignored." We asked the court to consider her conduct as a determining factor in the division of assets. On the second day of the trial, we brought in Alex, the private investigator, to the witness stand. He detailed how he had followed Penelope and Grayson, where they had been, and what they had done. Alex's testimony not only confirmed the evidence, but also painted a clear picture of Penelope's deception and manipulation that had lasted for over a year. I watched Penelope as Alex gave her testimony. She kept her head down, not daring to look up. Every word Alex spoke was an accusation, chipping away at her confidence. I wondered what she was thinking. Was she remorseful, or simply afraid of the consequences she had not foreseen? Her lawyer tried to argue that hiring a private investigator was an invasion of privacy, but Richard immediately countered, pointing out that all of Penelope's actions occurred in public, and the evidence collected was completely legal. A few weeks later, the trial ended with a final verdict. The judge, a middle-aged woman with a stern face, read the verdict in a room so quiet I could hear my own breathing. After considering the evidence and testimony from both sides, she said, her eyes moving to me, then to Penelope, "The court finds that the conduct of the defendant, Ms. Penelope Carter, constitutes a serious breach of the covenants of marriage. Furthermore, the improper use of family finances for personal gain is also a factor that must be considered." The judge decided that I would keep the lake house and most of the property. Penelope received only a small amount from the marital account, not enough to compensate for the losses she had caused. She also denied her request for monthly support, pointing out that she was financially capable of supporting herself. As the verdict was read, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Finally, after all the pain and tension, I had regained control. I looked at Penelope. She sat motionless, her eyes empty. I felt no joy, only emptiness, and a tinge of regret for what we had and what she had lost. After the divorce was finalized, I returned to the lake house, where I was now alone. Without Savannah's bright laughter or Penelope's figure bustling about in the kitchen, the space felt suffocatingly empty. Every room held memories, some sweet, some bitter. But now they were just scars of a life gone by. I spent the first weeks after the divorce cleaning out everything. I sold things I didn't need, packed up things that reminded me of Penelope, and put them in storage. Every time I saw a family photo from our Florida vacation or the wedding dress Penelope wore, I couldn't help but feel a pang of pain. But instead of running away from them, I learned to face them. Each item I put away was like a chain that had been holding me back. Late one afternoon, I sat on the porch, looking out over the tranquil lake. The setting sun was spreading across the sky and the water, dyeing the sky and the water red. This was where Penelope and I used to sit together, drinking wine and dreaming about the future. Now, it was just me and an empty chair next to me. But instead of feeling empty, I realized that I was experiencing something else. Liberation. Spring arrived with its usual gentleness in Dallas. Cool breezes wafted through the lakeside homes, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass and wildflowers. I stood by the window, watching the sunlight filter through the trees, and felt a rare sense of peace. It was time for me to do something new, something just for me. I decided to sell the lake house, not because I hated the place, but because I knew it held too many memories. A new chapter could not begin if I was still clinging to the past. After the house was sold, I moved to a small apartment in the city center. The apartment was nothing fancy, but I liked it for its simplicity and comfort, a place to start over. During this time, I also started to pay more attention to my health and well-being. I joined a gym near my home and took morning yoga classes. At first, I felt out of place in a group of strangers, but gradually I realized that taking time to care for myself was something I had neglected for too long. Those quiet moments on the yoga mat helped me learn to let go, not just of pain, but also of resentment. One day, while I was having coffee at a small cafe near my house, Savannah called. Her voice on the phone was no longer angry or accusatory, but sincere. "I want to see Dad," Savannah said. "Maybe it's time we talked about everything." I agreed, and 2 days later, Savannah came to visit me at my new apartment. When she walked in, I couldn't help but notice a maturity in her face, a maturity I'd never seen before. We sat down, had coffee, and started talking. "Dad," Savannah said, her voice slow, "I'm sorry I blamed you. At the time, I didn't understand what you were going through, but I understand better now. And I want to thank you for always holding on to your dignity, even when everything was falling apart." Her words were like a gentle breeze blowing through my heart. I felt part of my pain disappear, replaced by pride for Savannah, the strong and independent daughter I'd always loved. Over the next few months, I spent more time exploring myself. I took a photography class I'd been thinking about, exploring parts of Dallas I'd never seen before. I met new people who were also searching for change and meaning in their lives. One of them, Grace, was a woman who was taking the photography class with me. Grace had a warm smile and a sympathetic light in her eyes that I couldn't ignore. We began to talk more, from small things like the lighting in a photo to deeper stories about life and family. Grace had also been through a broken marriage, and we developed an understanding that didn't require many words. It wasn't love right away, but it was a start I never thought I would have. One evening, I sat by the lake in the park near my house, watching the water sparkle in the moonlight. I thought about Penelope, about all that had happened. I no longer felt angry or bitter. Instead, I felt grateful. Grateful that the journey had taught me the value of independence and self-respect. I don't know what lies ahead, but I know I'm ready. Life doesn't always go according to plan, but sometimes unexpected turns lead us to better places. I smiled, feeling for the first time in a long time that I was truly living, not for anyone else, but for myself.